So I'm going to convene the meeting, and the first order of business is the minutes from June 3rd, 2025. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve subject to modification.
Is there a second?
Second.
Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Hearing no proposed modifications, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays. The motion carries. The minutes are approved. Next is public comment. This is a time for anybody to make a public comment to the board. It can be something on the agenda or not on the agenda. Is there anybody in the room who wishes to make a public comment? Seeing no hands. Eric, is there anybody online?
Nope. No one online.
All right. So next on the agenda would be volunteer interviews for the positions on Development Review Board, Conservation Commission, and Energy Committee. There are 3 uncontested positions with 3 people, and I'm wondering, would the board be okay with calling everybody up to the table at the same time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so Lynn, Matt, and Pat can come up. Yeah. So welcome. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your interest. I think what I'd like to do is ask each of you to go through with introducing yourselves by name and which board you're applying for, and then I will ask you to tell the board a little bit about yourself. So.
Hi, I'm Lynn Levins, and I am seeking to be a member of the Williston Conservation Commission.
Right. Welcome.
Yeah. I'm Pat Rutkowski, and I'm interested in being a part of the Williston Energy Committee.
My name is Matthew Fraser. I'm interested in being a member of the Design and Review Board.
So if we can start back at the original side, Lynn, could you tell the board a little bit about yourself and what you would, why you want to be on the board?
Sure, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself through the story of 3 forests. One of them is right here in Williston, a town-owned parcel in between Allenbrook School and the fire department. This parcel used to be pasture, and it is returning to forest, but it is returning to forest mostly with invasive species. So I've been volunteering at this forest to plant native trees to push this forest towards becoming a native hardwood forest. A little bit about myself. I am a public health professional, mainly in infectious disease and environmental health, so I'm used to looking at things from the population level. And while I really love planting individual trees at Tree Island, this parcel I just mentioned, some of those trees from my own house in North Williston, I'm used to looking at things at the population level. And so I also really like to look at trees through the forest level. So the second forest I'm going to tell you about is a forest that my husband and I own in Northfield. This is a 400-acre forest that we just enrolled in the reserve category of current use. So in that category is reserved for parcels that are 30% or more riparian area and or steep slopes. So instead of managing for timber and maple, we are managing for habitat. And the third forest I want to tell you about is the forest right behind my house. This is its own forest, yet it's made up on the town map of multiple parcels owned by myself and my husband and all of our neighbors. And this is where I meet my neighbors. This is where I go for walks or contemplate life. And it has greatly contributed to my mental health and my physical health and well-being. And I really wish that everybody had access to a forest like this. So this brings me to why I would like to be a member of the Williston Conservation Commission. One is that I would like to get to know other forests in Williston. I know and other natural areas. I know there are many such gems. And I want to understand the connection between those forests at the town level, and that it would best be done through the Conservation Commission. I also want to help protect these areas for plants, animals, and humans. Plants, animals, and humans are very interconnected, and to really benefit from this connection, we need to protect places where we can all thrive. I think Williston is a great example of that and can be going forward.
Thank you. Pat?
Yeah, hi. Again, my name's Pat.
Oh,
Tap
hit the
the
button
base.
or the touch
Yeah,
pad.
there you go.
The red light.
My name's Pat Rakowski.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a stress interview.
good work. Looking for the red light. Okay. I am a new resident in Williston. My wife and I moved here about 2 months ago, so we're delighted to be here. And we came from the Mid-Atlantic area. Quick background for me is I was in law for a while, environmental law, and worked in media for about 20 years. And then got heavily involved in climate work the last 6 or 7 years down in the Mid-Atlantic region, and spent some time working in Annapolis and also in DC, looking at sustainable energy, looking at climate policy, doing research, doing some lobbying, doing some media relations. So that's where I developed a really keen interest in sustainable energy and addressing climate. And I'd like to help in any way I can with the Energy Committee. As I said in a couple emails I had with Melinda, I've been very impressed by the Climate Action Plan here. It's, having seen many, it's quite thoughtful and quite thorough. And I think with my experience, I'd be able to help out, and I'd like to contribute to it, and taking input from outside the town, looking RPC, and talking with a variety of different groups I've worked with over the past few years about best practices, where technology is heading, where policy is heading, and see if I can help the committee given that experience. So I'm delighted to be here and would like to help in any way I can.
Thanks.
Again, Matthew Fraser. I'm kind of a local, grew up in Colchester, lived in Williston the last 5 years. Father of 2 young daughters. And I would like to be on the board. I have interest in being on the board. I like design, construction, development. It's always been a place of interest for me. Seems like a great way to get your feet wet and kind of learn about the whole process. And I think finally, I plan on this being my home for a very long time. I would like to invest and kind of contribute towards the town in any way I can. And I always thought once I had enough time to volunteer, I would. And so I'm in that position, and I would like to extend my labor, I guess.
Yeah, keep the mic.
Yeah.
So the next question is a question that we ask everybody, and it's not a pleasant question, so I've taken it unto myself. But again, we ask this of every candidate for everything. In terms of potential conflicts of interest, these things do happen in a small town where people have lives. So the question I have is, what would you do to recognize a conflict of interest? And then if you did recognize one, what would you do after you recognize it? So,
I think right off the top of my head, just be completely transparent. I'm not here to really gain anything. I don't know if there is anything to gain. But I think just being completely transparent and above board, communicate well, and as long as the intents are good, I think it all kind of works out.
yeah.
Nervous to go first on that one.
What he said. Transparency, communication, I think that's always the key. I would certainly check with the other members of the committee right away. They have a lot more experience than I do in this town and in this particular committee, so I'd want to talk with them right away. But absolutely, just be transparent, communicate, ask questions, and be right up front.
Lynn? Oh, hit the button again. No.
It's in the front.
On the front.
On the other, yeah,
There you go. Nope.
Oh, no.
Very sad.
Yeah, I agree with my fellow residents. I think the other thing I would add is that it can, not only is it important to recognize actual conflicts of interest, but also apparent conflicts of interest to maintain trust in the organization. So if either of those occurred, I would talk to the chair and my fellow members to explore it. And it may mean recusing myself from decisions, or it may not, if there is no conflict of interest found.
Great. Questions from the board?
I think they've been watching and they were like, found out the answer to the questions. They come up with a new one, a new tough question.
It's not, I was only kidding about the stress interview thing.
I thank you all for volunteering to be part of the community. I think that's what makes this such a great community. Thank you for being part of that.
So my question's a little bit different for two of you versus for you, Matt. But I guess I'll focus on you two, and you'll know why in a second. But it's not that scary. But for you two, my question would be kind of having reviewed the materials and reviewing kind of the energy plan and different maybe hopefully a little. You've read the town plan that we're in development. What would you see as the priorities for the Conservation and Energy Committee, respectively? And then for you, Matt, my question is the DRB is similar to kind of a judicial body within our town, the closest thing we have to that. So it does require, a different level of commitment and work, and just how do you feel about that time commitment and in preparation and planning? And so whoever wants to go first, if you want to go first, Lynn, since the microphone's there, I guess.
Sure, yeah, and bad things happen when I touch it, so I'll just go with it while it's on. So in terms of priorities for Conservation Commission, there are some areas that are really key areas for conservation for wildlife, as well as recreation, and plants, rare plants. So identifying those and what are the key areas that we would want to protect, not that we necessarily always can. Looking for opportunities to protect areas when we can. There's some additional funds and the environmental fund as of last March, or at least we voted on it. And so really taking advantage of when parcels are for sale, which ones should be invested in to maximize the conservation benefit. I think also engaging other people in the process of conservation is really important. I volunteer with Sustainable Williston, and so we do a lot of outreach and just try to engage the community, because ultimately this is where we all live, and so it's important to get everyone's voice and whoever want, as many people who would like to participate in the efforts.
Did it. There you go. Yeah, looking at the plan again, I think it's tremendously thorough. I think some of the priorities that come to mind for me would be to look at buildings and transport, because that's typically 65 to 70% of most GHG emissions are from buildings and transportation. So I think first sort of splitting that in a way, looking at what the town is doing with its administrative buildings, with its police force, with the fire department, looking at, is there electrification, fleet electrification happening? Are the buildings all essentially, have they been modernized as far as insulation goes for efficiency? Are LED bulbs? I mean, simple sort of low-hanging fruit. It's not sexy always, but it's really important. It's sort of the crucial stuff that often gets overlooked. But those are small ways to start, and I think by the town, in a sense, taking the lead on that, acting as a model or an example, to me that's valuable. It also comes up against some of the mistakes or some of the problems that before homeowners or business owners have to walk through those same shoes. So I think that can be quite valuable. That's one thing I'd like to see if I were on the committee. That's something I would push for. Another thing is transit. Multimodal is really important. So that would be walking, biking, making sure that biking is safe. I mean, so much research shows that when bikers feel safe, they will ride. But if they have any questions about the safety on roads where the speed limits might be 35 or 45 or 50, they're not going to do it. So a lot of that is thinking about, gutter guides is great, but in some places are really found putting in not bollards necessarily, that's too expensive, but looking at intermittent curbs, other ways of sort of protecting bicyclists, that would be important. The idea of a circulator, I don't know, I mean, again, I apologize, we're kind of new here, but if that has ever been something that people have looked at, a way to get around Williston and the key spots through the main corridors, looking at ways that people don't need to use a car, but they can go ahead and rely on a public transit of sorts. That's probably the Transportation Committee, but these are all ideas that tie into energy and energy usage. So those are some of the things that I would think I would want to talk about. Listening is key. I mean, meeting people where they are. So I think having like the energy fair that you had last September is great because people get to see technology. They get more familiar with it. Something they may have heard about vaguely suddenly becomes tangible and real, and that's sort of the next step towards thinking about, maybe I want to install one of these. Maybe I'll look into it. So I think it's that outreach and just gradually stepping forward with different technologies is a way to go. So those are, I think, that outreach and education while listening, and at the same time trying to have the town lead perhaps in some of these technologies.
Sides only. Just to refresh, your question was time dedication towards the role?
Yeah, and because it is a more judicial body, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it, and,
Yeah.
and so forth.
From the little bit I saw, sorry, I'm trying to make eye contact with you. From the little bit I saw, the meetings were a couple nights a week, and I assume, learning the material like the back of your hand. That stuff, I kind of geek out over it. I enjoy it. It's like kind of solving a puzzle of where the rules apply and where they don't. So I enjoy that stuff. And then in terms of just the time dedicated towards it, if it's a couple nights a week, I'm mostly retired at this point. So my wife and I own a business, but day-to-day operations, I'm pretty hands-off. So I have the time to dedicate to something else. Yeah.
A couple days per month.
Absolutely, yeah.
Other questions?
While we're on
Go ahead.
while we're on this end, so when reviewing an application that technically meets zoning standards but raises community concerns, how would you approach your decision?
Sorry, can you repeat it again?
So if you were reviewing an application as a member of the DRB, and it technically meets zoning standards, but it raises community concerns for some other reason, how would you approach your decision?
I think, discussing it between the other members on the board so that we have a well-rounded decision. And then I think looking at it on a case-to-case basis of what is the situation, what are the concerns, what are the remedies. And I think if you have a good enough group and some level heads, you can find an outcome that kind of suits everyone. But yeah, I've been through it. It was I moved out of state for a couple of years, and growing up here, it was always frustrating, some of the building restrictions. I always heard my dad complaining about them and stuff like that. And then moved away, and then when I came back on my first home visit, I was like, oh my God, Vermont's beautiful. It was that first trip back, I bought my own first piece of property, and I just realized these rules are here to keep Vermont looking like Vermont, and I now have a different appreciation for that. So, I understand the rules are there for a reason, but that's why there's a board to make the decisions.
Other questions? Given that there are 3 positions and 3 candidates, would the board be interested in doing these motions now, or?
Yeah, I could do it.
Okay. The chair would entertain some motions.
You want to do them separately or do them all together? Okay. I'll move to appoint Lynn Blevins to the Conservation Commission for an unexpired 4-year term through June 30th, 2026, and also move to appoint Matt Fraser to the Development Review Board for a 3-year term from July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2028, and also move to appoint Pat Rakowski to the Energy Committee for an unexpired 3-year term through June 30th, 2027.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motions? Is the board comfortable with voting for all three at the same time? Okay, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
There are no nays, the motion's carried. Congratulations, and thank you very, very much.
Thank you all. Our volunteers and our committees are
Yep.
what makes this town really work and such a great place. So thank you for joining.
Thanks for the
Yes.
opportunity.
Thanks very much.
And Lynn, I like your committee appropriate shirt.
Oh, look at that.
I can tell. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you all.
That brings us up to personnel policy amendments. Aaron, good evening.
So I'm usually paperless. There's a lot going on here today, so I brought
We will forgive you.
and I also brought notes. There we go. All right. Eric, do you want me to jump right in, or do you want to introduce? Okay, sounds good. All right, so I'm here to walk you through proposed updates to the town personnel policy and to Appendix C, which is the harassment policy. The revisions are intended to align the policies with current legal standards, clarify existing practices, and strengthen our ability to recruit, support, and retain employees. I'll start with the simpler of the two. Appendix C, as you'll see, has no track changes, and that is because it was entirely revised by the town attorney to be up to current legal standards. So it is a completely revised version with the exception of us adding internal contact information and relevant reporting procedures. And I will point out, actually Shirley caught this, that it does list February 2025 as the possible approval date. We'll just amend that to whatever. That was when we were ready to present it to you, but
We're a little busy.
yeah, it's been, so actually that leads me into the personnel policy, which is what has brought us to past February. Over the past few years, Eric, Shirley, and I have done extensive research, and we have also took thorough notes on real-life personnel situations that we've identified areas in the policy to be improved. And drawing from those insights, we've worked collaboratively to draft the proposed revisions, which are track change. So I apologize if any of you are not really a fan of track changes, because there are a lot of them. But I will be able to summarize them in general categories. So for the first category, legal compliance and policy alignment, we expanded protected categories for equal employment opportunities to reflect current standards. We clarified the process for requesting and evaluating disability accommodations, and we added new sections to support pregnancy-related conditions in nursing mothers. And the language for those sections actually leans on legal. It'll continue to stay updated as the laws change, so we did that intentionally. Language based on legal guidance about collective bargaining agreements was refined to better clarify the relationship between the personnel policy and CBAs. We also included clarification that the town's internal classifications and eligibility for town-provided benefits may differ from eligibility for other benefits such as insurance or definitions of federal and state protections. And stop me at any point if you have questions, but I'll keep going until you do. For employee classifications and benefits, we did clarify exempt and non-exempt status under the Fair Labor Standards Act, which you probably have heard FLSA is the acronym. And we codified the existing practice of prorated benefits for part-time employees working over 20 hours per week. So we had been in practice doing prorated benefits, but this just puts it in the policy. We also expanded the definition of immediate family to be more modern and to be more inclusive, including now step relations, foster children, and legal guardianships. In addition, leave policies were updated to better support employees, including allowing immediate use of accrued sick and vacation leave, and clarifying military court and bereavement leave. So for example, with vacation and sick leave, there was actually a restriction that they couldn't use the time, even though it's accrued for the first 6 months of employment, which we found is not really supportive for modern work-life balance. And we also updated terminology, renaming department head to senior leadership to reflect that the positions of assistant town manager and human resource director also hold leadership roles, so we don't have specific departments that we oversee. In terms of recruitment and workforce flexibility, we increased the residency requirement for the police chief and public works employees from 25 to 30 miles. It probably doesn't seem like a big distance, but really it is. And that's to better stay competitive because of the challenging housing market. It's really challenging for people to find housing in Chittenden County, and that's really impacted our recruitment as well. The performance review process was edited to be more collaborative and department specific, and also aligning it with budgeting cycles. And our compensation benchmarking is edited to include Vermont and New England markets, and also with formal annual pay band reviews instead of, I think previously the language was reviews of everyone's salaries. So it'll be annual pay band. We've also documented the town's existing workflow for vacant positions and added, I did want to call this to your attention, added language for the town manager to create new positions for the purpose of promotions, but only with it not increasing the FTEs. So any increase in FTE would still require select board approval, but that just gives Eric a little more flexibility to give staff opportunities for promotion when it makes sense operationally. On workplace conduct and culture, we now use gender neutral and consistent language and clearly defined expectations of respectful behavior, dress, and workplace relationships. We've clarified incident reporting procedures for workplace injuries and accidents to ensure timely and compliant handling. And then lastly, on an administrative updates, we formalized practices around time reporting, on-call pay, and evening meeting compensation. Appointment and probationary period language was updated. And then we, processes around resignation and leave usage during notice periods were clarified. And that's really to try to get ahead of the long goodbye type of situations that employers often find themselves in. And then throughout the policy, we removed outdated or duplicate language to improve just the overall readability and consistency of the document. So really, and that is the high-level summary of the edits, and happy to entertain any feedback or questions that you have.
Questions from the board?
And I'll get my sticky notes out.
When was the last time this was updated? Because there's a lot of crossouts.
It's been a while. There's been some kind of ad hoc updates, like when we did the remote work policy or other kind of, but overall updating. I mean, a lot of the edits that you'll see is really to be up compliance with legal requirements and such.
I think moving forward, ideally, we'll have like an annual look at this, just with laws changing and other operational items that we come across. And this is probably reflective of probably 5 to 6 years of a more comprehensive update at this point.
Been a fair amount of, I don't know if it's the right term, but cultural expectations that had to be wrapped in.
Yep.
That also cross into legal, but just there's a lot of like expectations around nursing mothers and things like that.
Right.
It's really changed, at least in the last 10 years, so.
And even though those, I mean, we were still complying with those laws, but having it in writing also helps employees know. I mean, they may not be as familiar with those type of laws that protect their rights. And so it's also helpful to have everything, you know, in the policy so that they're aware of what their rights are.
And you can, if an employee. I've been in situations where an employee, you're just being compliant, but they think you're giving them a favor, and then they want it to continue, and now it gets a little bit messy, so, so no, it's good to have everything lined up.
Any questions?
I appreciate the intense amount of work that this is, and really reflective of, I mean, I know it was collaborative, but for you in particular, I know that this was a lot of work. My only question is, and not to delay the process anymore, is that we are getting an HR manager, or HR, I still care, director. Why, I don't know why that word won't stick in my brain. We are hopefully getting an HR director real soon. My only thought was, should we wait to approve it and just until they have their eyes on it? And one final pass through. Obviously, you know, they will not be nearly as familiar with the town and the policies and these things and all the time and work as you have put in it, but I just didn't know as a board if we thought that, you know, we should, I mean, again, this is kind of Erin's passion project, passion, I don't know, but Erin's, you know, again, a lot of her labor in this, but thoughts on that?
I think it's a really good question. I'd be comfortable approving this knowing that the HR director might, after a year, have recommendations or changes, and we could do that again in a year. I mean, there's just so many changes that I'm sure there's things that might pop up.
Yeah, and for a different perspective on that, actually part of why we're trying to do this is to memorialize things that we're doing right now, to make their beginning of their job a lot easier than it has been for Shirley, Eric, and I. Certainly, if anything's identified that they do have, you know, maybe improvements they can make or questions, anything that is really complex, we had legal review, so it's definitely a very compliant, updated policy. But our intent is to give them a good foot forward when they begin, rather than them having to work on an old policy and then us having to explain to them, well, actually, this is how we do it. And also, so much of it, I think, is really important for recruitment. I mean, people are doing their research as they're applying for jobs. And for example, the vacation leave time right now, you know, for the first year, people only get 5 or 6 days of accrued vacation.
It's like a week's worth.
We always, you know, if we're gonna offer a position, we say, we want you to know that if you read the personnel policy, this is flexible. We, you know, can credit you some years towards your service, because it hinders our ability to recruit. If we're lucky, people are applying and giving us that opportunity to at least say, hey, we recognize that this probably isn't desirable, but we'll make this happen for you.
We are hoping to potentially have another update later this year after the director's on board. We put some things in the parking lot related to some more financial elements of it. We want to do some more research and get their lens on it too. Some things like longevity pay for non-unionized staff that's in here that needs some updates, and kind of looking at some benefits comparisons with other municipalities as well. But we wanted to hold on that for right now, and more budget related to kind of bring to you later this year as well.
I will also note there are appendices A through N. We only revise C. All of those other appendices also need review and updating. They have plenty.
Oh, so they won't be bored.
Yeah.
I think anyone looking to be, you know, apply for the HR director, an updated policy is a positive. They know that the town is staying current. You know, good point made by Greta. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? If not, there is a proposed motion.
I move to approve amendments to the town personnel policy.
Is there a second?
A second?
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays. The ayes have it. The motion carries.
Excellent. You're going to see me walk into my office, clean it up, and post it.
To the minute.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
I just want to thank Aaron for all her
True.
hard work. This is quite
that's really
quite a
nice.
lift
Yes,
to go
it's been
through.
a lot of work on your part.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Next up, Williston Road Multimodel Scoping Study. So,
Yeah, I can kick this off, and I've got
Christine?
Emily online and Christine in the room here, so. So I can kick this off. The town received funding through the Unified Planning Work Plan, or UPWP, as the acronym you're familiar with, in fiscal year 2025 to update a prior scoping study for a multimodal path adjacent to Route 2 to create a connection between the village and Taft Corners. And you'll receive an update and overview of that study this evening. This would be a major future project for the town. It's one the town's looked at for several years here for future capital planning and overall bike ped and infrastructure prioritization planning in the future, should the select board wish to pursue it further. I wanted to note as we get into looking at this project was originally designated a Phase 3 CERC Alternatives project. To date, no fundings have been allocated by the state for this project. A timeline for funding allocations not known at this time. Being a Phase 3, and there's several Phase 2 projects remaining in the county, the timeline for possible allocation of these state and federal funds, I'd say it's likely several years away. Should the town wish to focus on that funding source. This scoping study is an update to the prior study that was completed in advance of the CERC Alternatives project studies that were beginning of last decade, 2012, 2013 or so. No formal actions required. It's going to be an ongoing discussion for the select board and your capital planning. You'll see some alternatives that are presented this evening. I think they're seeking some feedback from the board on these alternatives. Ultimately, you'll see the price tag is several $1 million for this project. And as the select board thinks about this moving forward and funding, keeping in mind if you want to move away from a CERC Alternatives project and look to find other funding sources maybe in the shorter term, that'd be a decision for the board to make. That would look to maybe prioritize a timeline for this. But I know Christine can speak to the CERC Alternatives a bit too. If you have any questions, and I included in your packet the CERC Alternatives report just for reference. It's been several years since the board talked about this, and the project being worked on Mountain View Road intersection with Route 2A right now is the CERC Alternatives project, along with the James Brown Drive signalized the light that was put in maybe 3 years ago or so. So the state is moving this forward. That's been on state highways so far. This project and the widening of Mountain View Road are the Phase 3 projects identified for Williston, which we think are a little further in the future for that federal and state funding to come together. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christine and Emily from Du Bois and King.
Yeah, Eric, I think you did a great job of doing the introduction, and I think we have our consultant, Du Bois and King, are on the line, and Emily Lewis is going to go through the talk about this project. As Eric said, we're not looking for an endorsed preferred alternative this evening, but just looking for your comments. Just mention that Matt and Melinda were both very involved with this project, the planning phases. Marshall Distel from our office is online as well. Yeah, so Emily, if you are able to, you want to just go ahead.
Hi, thank you both for that introduction. Can everyone hear me well?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I will go ahead and, Eric, are you able to provide sharing so that I can share the presentation?
Oh, yes. Oh, here we go. I knew I forgot to do something. Here it is. Hosts and panelists. Okay, give that a try.
And the correct screen to share. Okay, here we go.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so yes, Christine mentioned, so we've been kicked off this project last fall, working with Christine and Marshall from CCRPC and Matt and Melinda from the town of Williston. And so the main purpose of this project was to review alternatives to improve the pedestrian and cyclist connectivity between Taft Corners and Williston Village along Route 2, which is approximately 2 miles. Currently does not have any bicycle and pedestrian facilities. And when bus service was discontinued, it really limits the ability of residents to move throughout this portion of Williston very easily if they don't have cars. One of the changes since the prior study is there was a bike lane added, which has made some improvements, but it doesn't fully serve the demand for cyclists, particularly those that aren't particularly comfortable or experienced on a road of that size and that speed. We had 2 public meetings, a local concerns meeting, and that followed with an alternatives meeting where we got to hear from the public their thoughts around this project, as well as we had a survey getting feedback, and there was very strong support from the community for a multi-use path along Route 2. So as Eric described, we're at the phase of scoping study, so we're examining different alternatives, providing estimated costs to that would then allow the town, if they desire to move forward into further design phases and potentially construction should it be desired. Just a brief timeline of the project. So you can see we had our local concerns meetings in December, and then our alternative presentation in March. And so this black line around here is the project area, again, from Taft Corners down, just including the village, some key areas within that project area. And I do want to point out the orange line through there is the Cross Vermont Trail, so that there is an off-road connection that goes throughout the town. However, it doesn't necessarily solve the issues of people wanting to have a direct connection between the two portions of the town. And then the yellow shows where the sidewalks are in this area, and you can see pretty clearly just that lack of color in the project in this portion along Route 2. So these are some of the design criteria that we looked at when designing a shared use path. Path minimum would be 8 feet, preferred would be 10 feet. Part of that is for people using it in both directions, as well as for maintenance, for plowing. I believe in Williston, the other shared use paths are 10 feet wide, which allows a pickup truck with a plow on it to be able to plow those. And then separation from the roadway, curbed and uncurbed showed here. The alternatives we're proposing are uncurbed, so we want a separation of a minimum of 5 feet, but trying to provide more where possible. And then we also look at the grade, recommended distance for different percent grades. So once you start getting up to those steeper grades, ideally you don't want to have it going for more than, for example, for 10%, more than 100 feet without a rest area for accessibility. And those are just recommendations from the VTrans Pedestrian and Bicycle Facility Planning and Design Manual. So those things that we kept in mind throughout this process. And then looking at considering different types of surfacing, which comes into play when we looked at our opinions of probable construction cost. So we have 4 alternatives, 2 along the north side of Route 2 and 2 along the south side. They're all 10-foot wide curbless shared use paths separated by from the roadway by a minimum 5-foot green buffer. This alternative A1 stays mostly within the right of way, but does pass into private property at Taft's Farms on the western edge. And it proposes 2 new pedestrian crossings on Route 2 to connect to existing sidewalks in residential neighborhoods. And it does include a relatively steep incline in the portion of the roadway near the Roman Catholic Church. So here I'm going to go through detailed areas of each of these. So starting on the west at Talcott Road, you can see in blue here, these are existing sidewalks or pathways. The yellow is property lines and right-of-way. So you can see here on the left side of the screen, the west side of the project, a little bit of an area where in order to maintain some of that distance away from the roadway, it would cross over into the Taft Farms property. And then where possible, trying to keep it more than 5 feet away from the roadway to provide a little bit more separation. A few areas where there might need to be some expanded right-of-way, crossing in front of the fire department. as you move east, again, where the right-of-way is wider, generally trying to keep it further away from the road. This is not necessarily an exact location. This was kind of our best estimate looking at the topography information that we had, trying to take into account where there could be some switchbacks or changes in location to address those grades, and again, to maintain more of a buffer from the roadway where possible, to make a more pleasant user experience. We've noted where there are some areas where there are steep grades or cross slopes, again, areas where the right-of-way might need to be expanded. The first crossing is here at Talcott Road, to be able to allow the people who live down in that neighborhood to cross over onto the path. As we approach Southridge, the path tapers a little bit to meet up with where that existing crossing is. And then, the buffer tapers a little bit to meet with where that crossing is, and then expands again as you continue to move to the east. And then continuing along Route 2 here, this is where the steepest portion of the route is. And then the shared use path itself would end just prior to where the existing sidewalk picks up to the east of the Catholic Church. And this shows mostly the same as the previous slide, with the exception of adding this north-south crossing here at Old Stage Road and Tower Lane to connect those two neighborhoods. So some of the strengths is creating the shared use path, including a green buffer. This alternative in particular crosses the fewer linear feet of private property, and avoids the need for a pedestrian bridge. Some of the challenges are it does cross over Class 2 wetlands and wetland advisory areas, which are areas that, according to Agency of Natural Resources, have high likelihood of being wetlands, but have not been mapped. It is close to some of the FEMA flood hazard areas, would require some cooperation from landowners, as well as some right-of-way expansions. It does pass near, flip back a couple of slides. These two homes on the north side, it does pass a little bit relatively close to some of their infrastructure, like mailboxes and things like that. So that's something that we are cognizant of. And then it does pass in front of the fire station, which some people did bring up as a potential concern during the two public meetings. And then that grade near the church may limit some accessibility for users. Alternative A2 is pretty similar for the most part to A1. However, the main difference is that it proposes moving the portion of the path near the church onto the church property to avoid the steep incline of the road through a series of switchbacks. So it's the same here, continues the same, past Southridge, and then at this point is where it would deviate over onto the church property again, and going behind it to try to alleviate those steep slopes. We had some reach out to the church. I don't believe we got any response from them to try to just have an initial conversation. And then similar on the eastern end with the crossing at Old Stage Road. So the main strength of this is providing that switchback design to avoid those steep grades, which could enhance accessibility for a broader range of users. It does include, it is longer, it does include the coordination and approval with the church property. So then the B alternatives are on the south side of US 2. These alternatives would require a pedestrian bridge near the western end, and I'll point that location out. So this would pick up approximately where the existing path ends at, I believe this is, am I remembering correctly, Cottonwood Drive? This existing path there, and so then picking up, there would need to be obviously a connection here, picking up along the south side, and again trying to maximize the use of the right-of-way where possible to provide a greater buffer. The first crossing would be here at Talcott Road to connect into that that sidewalk system. You do avoid crossing in front of the fire department. This is a location where a bridge would likely be required. If you look at the photos or the street view, you can see that there's a culvert that goes under the road, and on the south side of the road, there is a bit of a kind of like a little gully that it would cross over, so require some bridging there, and that's kind of the main thing that increases the cost of this alternative. Continues generally alongside the road, again calling out where there are some steeper grades where you might be getting close to the edge of the right-of-way. Crossing at Southridge Road. And then similarly to A1, a relatively steep incline going along the south side of the road up until you meet Old Stage Road and Tower Lane, and again with a crossing there. So some of the same challenges as the previous alternatives, passing through the wetlands and wetland advisory areas, which may require delineation and permitting near flood areas, and then that 75-foot pedestrian bridge. It does avoid the fire station and some of those properties that were relatively close to US 2. And please ignore the second bullet point. It does not do that. Sorry, that's for the next one. So alternative B2, this is where it diverts from the B1 alternative 3 locations, moving the path further away from US 2 wherever possible. So both avoiding the steepest parts of the road and improving user experience by moving it further away. Pedestrian bridge would also be required in this alternative, since this is a little bit further away from the road. It's approximated that this bridge would be 110 feet long, so about 35 feet longer than the B1 alternative. So starting over on the right side of this image, this is where we start pushing further out into the property here. And in these areas, since these areas specifically were proposed for pushing the path further away from the road because they are currently publicly owned. So this is where the longer bridge would be required. Follows the same route as B1 along the south side of the road, same crossings. And then moving here, this is the property from the Commons, pushing off into there to again try to alleviate some of that steep grade alongside Route 2. Initial conversations with representatives from the Commons indicated preliminary support for that. They had some questions regarding screening from homes, which would be included if this design were to move forward. And then similarly ends with the crossing at Tower Lane, Old Stage Road. So again, similar challenges. The additional strengths are moving further away from US 2, avoiding some of that steep grades. Initial outreach to the Commons was positive. So costs for all of these. The total cost for the alternative A1, so that was the north side adjacent to the road, is approximately $4.3 million. A2, which deviates onto the church property, 4.9 million because of that, the additional length of path. The B alternatives are a little bit more expensive because of that pedestrian bridge. And so B1 comes in at approximately 5.3 million, and then B2, where it deviates a little bit further from the road, is 5.6 million. And so we put together kind of a matrix, kind of looking at some of the pros and cons of different elements within the path. So we looked at effectiveness. Does it meet the purpose and need? What is the distance from Taft Corners to Town Hall? How many crossings are required from one side of the path to the other side, to the other side of the road? Land impacts, potential wetland, right-of-way, street or driveway crossings, additional property impacts, and that could be anything from landscaping to mailboxes to driveways. Then constructability, if there's a significant amount of cut or fill needed, the number of existing overhead utility poles, existing hydrants, impacted culverts, proposed bridges, and then cost. And so the higher numbers are more favorable, the lower numbers less favorable. So for example, the A alternatives have a very high score in regards to hydrants because there are very few impacted, whereas the B alternatives have a low score because there are the water line runs along the south side of the road. So it's just one metric that we look at to try to determine what might be a more favorable alternative. And so you can see the rank on the right side of the screen with A1 being the highest, then A2, and then both of the B alternatives coming in slightly lower than that.
Could you tell me what the right-of-way impact means? So that's a variable.
Yeah, so the right-of-way impacts are those areas where we anticipate that there might need to be additional right-of-way or easements because the path comes very close to the edge of the right-of-way. Now, I will give the caveat that the information we are using is GIS, and so that it might be slightly different than what is shown on our plans. But that's generally what that impact means.
So, for instance, A2, if the Catholic Church said, sure, we'd love to have that in there, that number would change pretty quickly, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's correct. So B1, it has the highest score because there are very few, if any, areas where we anticipate you'd have to go outside of the right-of-way.
Great, thank you.
Sure. And then so we did look at some things that were what we considered unquantifiable. We can't really give a number towards. So the pros and the cons, and then public input and initial landowner support. So some of the pros are, it's a direct path staying mostly within the right of way for A1 and B1. For A2 and B2, providing a less steep path and a more pleasant off-road experience. Some of the cons are, kind of, while it may be a most direct path, it is very close to US 2, which might not be the most desirable user experience. And then coordination with property owners could potentially be a con if they were not amenable to that. And then some of the public input that we received, there were, I mentioned that for the A alternatives, there were some concerns about crossing in front of the fire station and near those two residences. For the B alternatives, there is more protected land on the south side of US 2 there, as opposed to the north side where there are a lot more residences. And then at the last public meeting, there were some representatives from the Commons who expressed some initial support for that alternative. So just some elements that we want to take into consideration as well, not just kind of those metrics on the prior slide.
From your standpoint, which path seems the most feasible to you? Would work, do you think would work?
That's a really tough question, and we all had a pretty significant conversation about that as well, because there are a lot of pros and cons to both sides, and I think I could make an argument for either one. I think one of the things to help make that decision that we think is important is to conduct an environmental review. So as I mentioned, that there are wetlands, class 2 wetlands, which have been delineated, and then wetland advisory, which indicate the likely presence of wetlands throughout the project area. And so those could have an impact on each of the alternatives. So we would recommend, prior to selecting an alternative and moving towards the next steps with moving towards final design and construction, conducting an environmental review, wetland delineation. We have the whole recommendations in the report right next to me. Give me a moment. So wetland and surface waters delineation, rare, threatened, endangered species review, including bat habitat, non-native, invasive plant identification, DEC wetland verification, and then that would be condensed into a natural resources report with mapping, data forms, photos, which would then provide a lot more information, I think, to be able to make a further informed decision on the preferred alternative. So I think at this point, we don't necessarily have a recommendation for a preferred alternative, and we're not, as Christine and Eric mentioned, we're not asking for a decision from the select board on a preferred alternative tonight, but wanted just to start that conversation and have a discussion regarding those alternatives before any further decisions are made.
So it sounds like before we make if we really go any further, we need to look into the wetlands and that part of this before we can really make any recommendations at all.
Yeah, and it's something that would have to be done as a part of the next project process anyway. So we're just recommending doing that kind of prior to moving forward with a preferred alternative.
It's something for the select board to think about as you look at capital planning, investing funds in that kind of prologue here for next steps for this project. And I think one of the elements of the town plan is looking at bike and pedestrian infrastructure planning moving forward. The select board could consider how it wants to prioritize projects moving forward to then direct our capital planning. So this became a top priority for the select board. You said, let's move forward with this in, the next 5 to 10 years, and you want to allocate some funds in a future capital plan to do that. That could be a more shorter term step for the board. It will ultimately come down to how you want to prioritize these different projects in town, and to be thinking about that planning element probably over the next year and a half.
Just because I have to make this comment, so I have it out there, that the church, which it's not its fault that it's on the top of a hill, but if you go behind the church, there's no room for a path. The parking lot goes right up to a really steep embankment, so you would be taking away 25 or 30 parking spaces. So, but I kind of assume looking at it, going in front of the church or behind the church is not really the issue. It's the path up through the field, which is. Question though, not ideal, but did you consider at all crossing from the north to the south or the south to the north?
We did discuss that a bit. Let me, I think our concern with that was let me think about this, because it was
I mean, it kind
a topic of discussion.
Logical place to cross would be right at the bend, which would be really dangerous. That's kind of why I assume it wasn't feasible, even with big blinking lights and a stoplight or something, but.
Yeah, I think what made the most sense, I believe, was the north side from like Taft Corners to South Ridge, and then the south side from there. But it doesn't necessarily alleviate the potential concerns regarding crossing by the fire department and some of these homes here. So while you avoid having this bridge here, you do have potential other constraints as well.
So it would be not ideal, and it really didn't help.
I think it didn't. I don't feel like it necessarily solves enough of the challenges to really have it on two different sides. It still could be a consideration, particularly if you did an environmental review and it came back with some additional challenges on one side or the other. Then maybe that becomes more of an opportunity to look into having it cross at one point. We did note that as part of our local concerns that there were a lot of community concerns regarding the intersections, particularly here at South Ridge. So we had some concerns about having that be a more of a permanent crossing for the path.
A thought I had to it. Oh, I was just going to say, a thought I had in future capital planning too is the town could consider segmenting this off. There could be the western segment connecting up to South Ridge, and then the eastern segment getting up the hill at some point to separate the projects with planning at some point. But it's a hefty price tag to be thinking about.
Actually, on that, this was originally, and still is technically, a CERC alternative, right?
Yeah.
Which is only 11 years old, and it's phase 3. It's in phase 3, and they haven't even funded everything in phase 2 yet. So I'm just, the financing of this would be pretty intense. State, maybe I'm wrong about this, but my understanding is the state was going to pay for CERC alternatives. And if they're not going to pay for this, then that would leave us, and we've got a library project and possibly a
Community center?
And all kinds of things like that. So I guess to ask a productive question, are there matching funds and grants that still exist given the current climate, or do we anticipate they will exist a year or 2 or 3 from now if we put this into a capital planning mix and start trying to save money of it, so we could get matching funds, or hopefully more than that? Is that?
Yeah, I think through, I'll look to Christine on some of this too, but through the V-Trans, they have annual grant programs, but you're probably looking at a few $100,000 potentially that with a 20% match. The last time I looked at it, with the CERC alternatives funding, I think that flows through the federal funding for the regional transportation improvement plan, the TIP plan, that has to get allocated with different ways the federal dollars are allocated amongst the county. But that's my cursory understanding. So, Christine, if you can shed any more.
Yeah, no, that's correct. And I think it would be the expectation that if you apply.
Is that on?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry. That either, we don't know about the grant programs moving in the future, but we would expect either bike ped or transportation enhancement would pay for 80% of the funds. I think as a CERC alternative, what V-Trans has said is the phase 3 CERC alternative projects compete with the rest of the projects in the state. They're not getting automatically completed. Some of them are underway, but it's inconsistent, and I think we really can't say for certain. But certainly being a circle alternative, I would think would would enhance it if you applied for a bike ped grant. You've mentioned the limitation in cost, so certainly the cost is an issue, and segmenting them is probably a good idea, but I think it's difficult to predict, and we'll know more as we move forward if you choose to move ahead with it.
In the last 3 or 4 years, I've worked with Public Works to ask about circuit alternatives projects, saying, hey, any updates, state, on, when the funding we might see an allocation. And I think if the town wants to play that out a little bit longer, I think continuing to be a squeaky wheel advocating for, state, for the funding to come through on these projects will be important. It's hard to say when exactly that funding could occur. So it's a policy decision if the board wants to move this forward maybe sooner than that or not.
They used to come and make a presentation at the select board like pretty much every year, as I recall. Somebody from AOT would come in, a group of people, and, starting in, I think, 2015, 2016, and the answer was, yeah, not yet. No, it's on, we're in they have like a conceptual phase or something like that, and a lot of these things were still just dreams. But then I think J. Brown Drive is one of the alternatives, and that looks like it's actually happened. But I wonder if it'd be possible for us to ask for a presentation on circ alternatives from the state. We don't have any authority over them, so they might say, no, we don't do that anymore. But if we're going to make some noise, that might be a way to do it. And I do recall that the park and ride that is in place now on 2A took so long that at first it was supposed to go behind Skateland. Anybody remember Skateland?
Those of us who remember the circ, remember Skateland.
I skated to Bobby Vinton, Blue on Blue, Heartache, oh yeah. But anyway, I mean, my point is that it takes a long time sometimes, but I don't know where that takes us, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Well, I like the idea of being a little bit squeaky wheel to see if this gets anywhere. I also think we have other paths, to your point, your original point, Eric, is that we should kind of look at all of it. I heard a lot. I did watch the public meeting on this input meeting, and there's a lot of people saying, well, how about the sidewalk and right in the village? That needs upgrading too. So, and then Mountain View Road has no shoulders, so that's a big problem. So we have other things, and I know we did get a list from Public Works last year, which was helpful, but before I'd start prioritizing millions of dollars for this, I'd at least want to make sure I was confident I understood the other ones. And as far as doing the environmental study, we did that for the Allenbrook Park, and it wasn't wetlands, and then when we got around to doing it, it was wetlands, so I'm a little hesitant to do a wetlands study before we have a sniff of where the money's coming from. But
I believe wetlands delineations are good for 7 years.
okay, let's wait a couple of years then.
Yeah.
That's what ultimately killed the Cirque Highway itself, isn't it? Wetland issues that.
Really?
I thought so. I thought the Bush administration said, yes, go. And they started digging, and then the federal court said, I'm going to grant that injunction because there might be some wetland issues. And then there was a study, and Governor Shumlin said, let's just forget the whole thing.
Yeah, there was something of concern where it was the right-of-way goes through Redmond Road, and there's going to be a bridge over to 289. I think there was some environmental concerns around the Cap landfill area. Yeah.
So, if you're looking for direction, I'm going to ask the other board members to provide it because I don't know what to do.
I think we're going to, on this particular, I think I would be comfortable waiting until we look at all of the path projects and all of our capital needs to see where it might get prioritized. And on this, I think this is really well done, very thorough. I appreciate the comments. and now I understand where the pedestrian bridge has to go. I can't think of anything that's really missing from here except the environmental study, which I think it would be premature. So I would just kind of accept this report and move to our capital and path planning.
And if I can add, if it's helpful, so this could be, the environmental study could be paid for by CCRPC, and then you would need to submit another UPWP application, Unified Planning Work Program. And so that's something that you can, talk about as we do our solicitation next year and decide whether you want to make that application.
Well, that's a good idea, because it would be good to know.
Yeah.
That's good for 7 years.
Wetlands, she said, was good for 7 years.
Oh.
Yeah.
And we do include in the report, in the implementation section, we do include some information about the environmental study and the approximate price of what they would include.
I struggle a lot. I recognize we have so many upcoming capital needs and projects we're considering and things. My hesitancy in saying let's just hold off and wait for, see if the CERT comes through is that the disconnection of the Taft Corners area from the village is a major problem and is a major equity issue, because there's lots of folks within our community that do not have access to our the village center and our government functions. And so I do see that as bumping it up on the list of really big needs. Not to mention, obviously, having a walkable, bikeable town in the environmental and energy and sustainability goals that also meets. But just in terms of, access to our the town government and the police station and town offices, I do think that this is imperative. And so I'm not sure what that looks like. That looks like let's do the environmental study and see from there, what that looks like. But I do see it as a priority, and I'm not sure that we can just wait and hope that the state pays for it.
Well, if that's an issue, there are other ways to solve that problem. Like our gentleman from the Energy Committee, right? We had a circulator bus that came up here. Though people didn't take the Green Mountain Transit bus either. But, there are other ways. If that's a problem we need to solve for $5 million, probably $7 million by the time we get this thing built. So there are other alternatives to consider. So if you think that's
well,
really
we did the microtransit study was one of the things that was on the docket for potential ARPA funding, and I think that is no longer on the.
We did an initial study
Right.
a couple years ago, and
Yeah.
correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, I think the operational cost to operate a microtransit route was maybe $500,000 annually or so. So there was, trying to remember where that number was. It was somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah.
We can always dig into those things further too in the future.
Yeah.
I like old-fashioned exercise, walking and biking. I like the idea of people being able to get exercise outdoors and in the nature. I think this is going to become more complex as the town grows. It's just going to be much more difficult to do something with more right-of-ways.
Yeah, and I think the equity issue that Greta addressed will only be exacerbated as the growth center continues to grow out and we have more of our population center there, and there's continued difficulty getting to the village area.
I would encourage you to take a look at the appendices to the report as well. In particular, we have the results from the online survey asking people about their experience traveling in this area. And the vast majority of respondents said that they traveled this corridor every day or almost every day. So I think it is useful, looking at some of those comments and data as well as you make some decisions.
So
Pleasure of the board.
short-term staff could explore a UPWP application for next fiscal year to look at this potentially, to bring back to you in January as you consider those applications. As we begin the work on the budget this fall, with the town plan process ongoing, one of the conversations from the board is that future prioritization list for bike and pedestrian infrastructure. And it's gonna take a little time to develop that, and whether that's a residents committee that's appointed by the select board or with some staff support, or there's some different ways the board could think about how it wants to approach that. But those are some things I see in the short term you could think about as you kind of need that prioritization map, and then working on the funding, directing staff of how you want to prioritize these projects to go after the funding for them.
Does that sound good to people?
Sure.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Emily.
All right, thank you. It's a pleasure working with Williston.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's Matt getting the planning commission.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, yes.
we're your whole show tonight.
Yeah.
And Matt is coming back. He just, abandoned me to go take care of something over in the other building. So,
That does bring us up to Act 181, future land use and Tier 1B status.
correct.
Okay.
So this is Darren, also from the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission.
Hello, Darren.
Walk the board through this complex governance issue.
Yes. Yes, it is a complex issue. Thank you, Eric, and good to see you all. As Eric said, I'm from Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. We've been working with all of our municipalities to roll out Act 181 in Chittenden County. That means a number of things, and we've been working more directly with the Planning Commission in Williston to look through the map, talk about housing targets, which I think you folks submitted a memo to us recently about that. We appreciate that feedback. It's been very helpful. Tonight, what we want to focus on is Tier 1B, which is all about Act 250 review, specifically exemptions from Act 250 in areas where communities feel housing in particular should be encouraged, promoted, and may not need additional Act 250 review in addition to your local review. That's the whole idea behind it, is removing that extra layer of state review of statewide and regional impacts for projects that we are all in alignment of saying, hey, this is where we want housing, this is where we want to see that development. We've already planned for that locally. The regional planning commission's maps are saying that's where we want it, so let's put that all on the table. So the specific exemption that municipalities can request through the Regional Planning Commission of the State Land Use Review Board, which now oversees Act 250, is there's two different exemptions. One is this limited exemption specifically for housing projects that are of up to 50 units on 10 acres or less of land. So what that really means is small area of fairly dense housing, but not so big that it would look like some of the development that's planned for Taft's Corners. We're talking about missing middle housing. We're talking about medium-sized projects of a small subdivision or a mixed-use building with some housing above or behind. And we're talking about specific parts of communities in areas that the Regional Planning Commission has mapped as either a downtown center, a planned growth area, or a village center. All of those essentially align with Williston's sewer service area. So we're talking about places that you've already enabled growth, and you already have growth management, you already have robust zoning regulations that address the potential impacts of development at the local level. And honestly, because of the size of Williston and the amount of development you're seeing, they're addressing some larger impacts across your community and maybe regionally as well. So the choice before you tonight is to request that Tier 1B exemption of CCRPC, and we would then make that part of our regional plan adoption and confirmation by the Land Use Review Board, which will take place over the next year or so. We expect that to be adopted in June of 2026. Something else important to know is that Williston already has experienced the interim, or the exemption that we're talking about tonight. Act 181 created interim exemptions for all communities across the state based on the existing state planning designations. So because you have a growth center and a village center, and because there was a specific exemption for areas around transit routes in urban areas of Chittenden County, most of the area we're talking about that is eligible for Tier 1B has already been under the same interim exemption, the same exemption under those interim rules. Those would go away as of either January 1st, 2027, or when our regional plan is adopted. So this is your chance to say we want those interim exemptions to continue. So that's Tier 1B. It's, yes, very complex, but at its core, it's actually a fairly simple, it's a way of saying we want to promote housing in this area, and we don't need additional duplicative review of Act 250 because we've already addressed that locally. Some communities may not want to give up that Act 250 review. They might say, you know, we're small, we don't have that capacity, we like having Act 250 around, but we don't think that Williston is one of those communities, so your planning commission has thought that over and made a recommendation that's in your packet in that memo.
Matt told me that the last time that Act 250 saved us was in the early 1990s, so.
Yep. Oh, hey, Matt. Yeah. So Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about the planning commission's recommendation now, or if you want to talk about
Was it
Tier 1A yet, or at all.
before my time?
What would be most useful? I guess I can just start by, reporting to you that the planning commission at their meeting 2 weeks ago made a recommendation. It's part of the record of their meeting from 2 weeks ago, and it's the verbiage at the bottom of the draft resolution that you received in your package tonight. So that would be to move forward with Tier 1B designation in the areas planned for growth as shown on the CCRPC's draft future land use map, with the exception of the industrial zoning district east, roughly the Chittenden Solid Waste and IBM/Global Foundries, Velco area. So if we show a map, that'll be really obvious what that is. But that area makes sense in the regional land use planning regime to be mapped as an area planned for growth, but it is not an area that the town plans to serve with wastewater treatment. It's not an area where the town allows residential uses, so it's not an area that the town feels or that the planning commission felt it was necessary to extend the 1B exemption to. Because it's just not a place the town's looking to meet its housing goals, which is really what 1B is about.
Exactly. Eric, do you have the ability to share that map? I don't actually have it when I join on Zoom.
Oh, let's see. Is it in?
It should be in the Act 181 materials or CCRPC materials that are in the packet.
Oh, yeah. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right. Yeah, I can get that up on the screen.
So folks online as well can see that.
Yeah.
And while Eric's pulling that up, I'll just mention that the only reason that we included that industrial zoning district east in the planned growth area is a technicality of statute that otherwise we would have mapped it as enterprise, which is closer to what you have locally, but we can't map them adjacent to other planned growth areas, and it just, for now, we're keeping it as that, but we're gonna ask the Land Use Review Board to maybe give us some flexibility on that, or maybe have a legislative change, we'll see. But at the very least, as Matt mentioned, you do not have to include that in your Tier 1B request at CCRPC.
So I found Redmond Road.
Yeah.
Is it Redmond Road west?
Yes.
Or west?
It's both sides of Redmond Road in the pink on this map. So under where it says Williston,
Yeah.
that area south of the town Essex and Essex Junction line would be, the Planning Commission's recommendation was not to include that in this exemption area.
Okay.
All of the other areas of pink planned growth area, the dark purple center area and the magenta pink village center are recommended to be included.
Gotcha.
Those are areas where you promote housing.
I don't think
Happy
of
to
that as
ans-
east.
Happy to answer any questions about that. We can also talk a little bit about Tier 1A, which is another type of exemption that Williston can get from Act 250.
Well, I know we've talked about this before in the couple discussions, right? The 1B, whatever.
Yes.
Right, that we've talked about a couple times, and planning department is comfortable that they've got it covered, and
Yeah.
there's no reason to have this extra layer just to slow things down.
Yeah.
Right, so we've experienced projects having the interim exemptions or the priority housing project exemptions already, and felt that the town's interests were still being met through just vigorous administration of our own zoning. So that sort of keys into the 1B conversation, and then the 1A conversation is a broader exemption that the town could apply for beginning January 26.
Yes, although you do need the regional plan to be adopted before you can officially obtain it, but you can start thinking about it.
So that broader exemption would also apply to larger residential or commercial projects. The recommendation in the draft town comprehensive plan that you have under consideration says to pursue 1A exemption in the growth center or the form-based code area, essentially the Taft Corners area. So there's a goal to work on that in the near future, but right now this is just about the 1B exemption, the housing 50 units or fewer. Is it 50 or fewer, or is it fewer than 50?
50 or fewer on 10 or fewer acres.
I want to be accurate, and on 10 or few acres. So when you look at that pink, purple, and magenta part of town, first off, anything you see that's bigger than 10 acres, which are some of the more big developable parcels, well, that's not exempt anyway. And then second, it's projects with 50 or fewer. So we tend to see, if you think of some of the projects that are underway right now, they're either on more than 10 acres or they have more than 50 units. So all three residential subdivisions that are either under construction or pending, Glazer, Sally's Way, and Summerfield, are all on more than 10 acres.
Sally's Way. Where's Sally's Way? Did that have a different name last month?
So if you turn onto Mountain View Road from Route 2A, it's the first one on the right that's all dug up.
Okay.
In a technical sense, that's how you find Sally's Way.
That's where the dirt is.
It'll be a street that connects through to Meadow Run.
Oh, that'll be nice. Not for Meadow Run, but I think.
We're working on that.
Yeah. All right, so we're just deciding Tier 1B tonight. And
So Tier 1A would be an additional just layer on Tier 1B. They would coexist. Tier 1A wouldn't replace Tier 1B.
It would be a broader exemption in those areas.
Okay.
So it would sort of eclipse it, I guess, or
Okay.
supersede it. More things would be exempt
Right.
under 1A.
And not that we are going to say we don't want Tier 1B, but if we didn't, for some reason, get the Tier 1B exemption now, could we still get the Tier 1A exemption later?
Yes.
Okay.
We think so.
I just wondered.
I don't think
All right.
anything in statute
All right.
would prohibit that.
Okay.
It would be an odd choice, probably.
I know.
but-
I'm not suggesting we do that. I just want for some reason. Okay.
Yes, but you actually bring up one other thing that I'll just mention, again, not that you are considering not doing
Yeah.
T1B, but this is the first opportunity. You can always opt in later if, for whatever reason, you don't want to tonight. Happy to talk about what that would look like if you're leaning in that direction.
Planning Commission recommends we go for 1B, correct?
Correct.
so I was just looking at the motion, and it says the Tier 1B, but also, and the regional future land map as presented. So is that what this is?
I think the specific bottom part of the resolution is saying just that You want all eligible areas, specifically downtown center, village center, and planned growth area on that map, except the industrial zoning district east, to qualify and then be mapped by CCRPC for Act 250 Tier 1B status.
That was my intent with the motion, to just codify what the resolution's saying, so.
So might be better worded to say that we move to adopt the resolution regarding Tier 1B
Yeah.
as presented.
Yeah.
So take out the land map.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, in thinking about, getting us towards our housing goals and the housing crisis we find ourselves in, it seems pretty self-explanatory that this was the right step to take, so.
We ready to
Yeah.
make a motion?
I'll move to adopt the resolution regarding Tier 1B as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays. The ayes have it. The motion carries. So I'll pass that around.
Excellent, thank
That'll
you.
do tomorrow.
Yeah, no rush.
All right.
Great.
Thanks for all the prep on this, Matt.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Made Derek's job really easy.
Maybe we talked about it a little too much, I'm not sure. Like to be over-prepared.
Yes. Lots of towns have spent a lot of time thinking about this, but I think Williston's done a lot of work to align with what is available to you, so.
Well, I
Makes sense.
appreciate being given the opportunity to make things easier for towns that can, right? So,
Yep. We're happy to close this discussion here. There were a couple other things in the memo that we're happy to talk about if you're interested, housing targets and the map itself, but if you would like to just move on to the rest of your agenda, that's also fine. The only the only action we were looking for tonight was that Tier 1B resolution.
but I think we did the housing targets thoroughly, but we asked for feedback, we sent the feedback back.
Yep, we got that.
What's the next step?
So the next step would be, once we formalize, or we collect all the feedback from all of our communities, which we're in the process of doing right now, we will potentially modify those draft targets a little bit as the map shifts a bit for especially communities like Williston, where the map informs the target. But it's probably going to be very similar to what was presented. And in terms of the specifics of your memo, noting that the medium and high targets would be a bit of a reach and would need some additional infrastructure investment. We have heard that from just about every community who's
Surprise.
yeah, exactly. And a strong call for state assistance in that. The great thing about Act 181 that is a part of the regional future land use map is that those state planning designations that you had before are now embedded in the regional map and will still qualify you for all of the incentives, benefits, priority for infrastructure studies, incentives for developers that were in the existing program, and maybe more as the state decides to roll those out. So that is definitely something that will come, and CCRPC will also be looking specifically at wastewater regionally. We've started that process through this housing targets exercise and trying to identify where the capacity is and where we can actually accommodate more growth. So I think we're going to look toward a little more detailed study of that across the region.
The only other thing I wanted to mention, and Darren, you might have covered it before I got back over here, is this map that we were looking at with these different colors on it, and it looks different from the town plan maps and the zoning maps, but kind of follows some similar boundaries. Just want to make sure folks are understanding what that future land use mapping exercise is, where it comes from, and why that's part of what Act 181 is looking for. And I don't have all those answers perfectly, and I don't need to go into it if everybody's got a good comfort level with that, but I know it can be a lot where, like for our planning commission or select board and working on the comprehensive plan, we've been looking at an awful lot of maps, and here's another set of maps that are a little bit the same and a little bit different. Certainly the coloring is different. And just understanding that there's actually a lot of coherence between what Williston's doing locally and what's happening regionally, and thence what's happening statewide. And this really is, maybe it's a thing planners get more excited about than everybody, but for the state of Vermont, engaging in some consistent land use evaluation and planning across the entire state is really going to help inform these efforts of understanding where housing need is, where housing need can be met, as well as other things like demand for services, potential for growth, jobs, and all of those things. So getting the whole state on the same page about what its land use picture really looks like, what its future land use looks like, is a really big step forward for the state. It's the first step forward taken in that regard in a really long time. And it should be foundational to some things that show up back in Williston eventually, like some of that infrastructure priority, or just where efforts are spent as we try to achieve those goals.
We can think of it like standardizing the parts of a car where you're the wheels, where the rubber meets the road. At the municipal level, at the regional level, we're running the crankshaft and moving things along. The state is the engine, and we're all trying to work in tandem. And now we're standardizing the parts so that we can all work together and interchange things as needed.
I won't go into what year or brand of car.
State is the engine got me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
out.
And I appreciate the continued work with the town of Williston on all of these important projects and initiatives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That would bring us up to fiscal year 26 municipal rate and fee schedule.
So we are on the brink of the new fiscal year, July 1st, so some business the board attends to is setting our rate and fee schedule for the new fiscal year. You'll have the tax rate on your next agenda because we need to mail tax bills by July 15th because the first payment's due August 15th. So that is moving along. But for this evening, you'll see we've updated the schedule. It reflects the rates that you approved for the enterprise funds at your last meeting. One thing Bruce flagged, our water connection charge, we didn't have it in the budget, but we typically include a 3.3% inflation factor, so that connection charge has been reflected in this table here.
Technically, we didn't approve them last time, right? We just reviewed them.
Just reviewed them,
Yeah.
but essentially, the budgets were built on assumptions
Right,
with these
yeah.
rates, so this would officially approve the rates, so we can do it for our next billing cycle. You've got support memos from the fire department, planning department. I think overall, no real huge changes here. We use our billing partner for the ambulance fees for guidance on those for regional. Some of our fire and ambulance staffing rates are tied to the contract as well for rates to hire that service out. So those have been updated. That's overall in a nutshell. So any questions from the board?
Questions for Eric? Is this the agenda item where you said you wouldn't have a lot of questions and you were hoping other people would crunch the numbers like you usually do?
No, I said this is the only one that had numbers in it.
Ah.
It always had pretty pictures, not my thing. Or a lot of words. In Aaron's case, a lot of words.
So if there are no questions, a motion would be in order.
I move to adopt the fiscal year 2026 rate and fee schedule as presented.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays. The motion carries. And that would bring us up to collective bargaining agreement.
So a tentative agreement for a new 3-year union contract has been reached with the New England Police Benevolent Association, Local 409, our police union here. The union membership has ratified that tentative agreement for the new contract. It's for the select board's consideration to approve that contract this evening. The board has seen this in advance with updates on negotiations throughout. The current contract expires on June 30th. So overall, it was a good negotiation process with union leadership. I'd like to highlight a few items here from the tentative agreement as the board considers it this evening. A competitive wage schedule with other police departments in the area. Changes to the wage scale to decrease the overall step structure. The addition of the rank of corporal for the department. A change to VEMR's Group D retirement. It's a common retirement group among most police agencies that we see. Changes to shift differential for overnight shifts and compensation when performing field training duties, codifying uses for sick time with state law to clean up some language, and addition of military leave language that reflects the personnel policy. So high level overall, the select board's seen this. There's a motion to consider approval, or any final questions the board has on this.
Questions, comments? Is there a motion?
I move to approve a new collective bargaining agreement with the New England Police Benevolent Association, Local 409, and authorize the town manager to sign the agreement on the town's behalf.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays, the motion carries.
Excellent work,
Yeah.
Eric.
That
That
more
was,
carefully into Deirdre to read it.
I know, that's why I was in trouble too, but no, that's huge. I mean, our police force is so skilled, and they fit our town really well, and I'm just really happy that we could come to an agreement in such a collaborative, respectful way. Means a lot. So thank you for making that happen, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And before year end, so we have.
And before year end.
So that brings us to manager report.
Yeah, so share some staff news. We're wishing well our planning technician, Hannah Hartman. She's wrapping up her service this week for, she's moving out of state for a great new opportunity. So we thank her. She's done a great job. She's been really helpful with the town plan work over the last year. So we wish her well. She's wrapping up this week, and we'll be working to recruit for that position. So preview for the board. So July 15th meeting is what we're targeting for a really significant update on the Village Vibrancy Project. That evening, you'll start with your comp plan, first public hearing, and then the rest of the meeting will be agenda for the Village Vibrancy Project. You'll have an overview of the capital campaign feasibility study presented to you, and some trustees will be in attendance that evening as well. Our consultant is wrapping up that study in the next couple of weeks, so they'll be on target to present that and deliver it to the board and the trustees on July 15th. That evening, we're also planning to have an update on the overall estimate for the project. Our architect is working with some recent bids that came in to see if how he would adjust the overall price there. Shirley and I are working with the bond bank on projecting some costs and different financing options. Shirley's going to be doing analysis looking at our capital schedule for the upcoming several years to look at when timing of debt might hit with other debt that's potentially anticipated for other projects and debt that's rolling off. We'll give the board a comprehensive picture of the financial components of this as you consider this. We're doing this now, and certainly it's a huge decision for the board, so it's sharing this information with you on July 15th, but staff will be seeking your feedback on overall project timing. If you decide you want to look at a public bond vote before the end of this calendar year, I'd suggest the select board make that decision by the first half of August, just for what needs to occur for public outreach for that, and the legal preparation for that as well. So if that'll be for your future agenda, but if you have one meeting in August, I'd suggest if you're potentially looking at that timeline, to consider adding a special meeting in early August to continue that discussion and make a decision. If it is that November timeline, if you decide you're looking at a timeline that's into next year, there's certainly more time as well. But just to keep that on the board's radar, that's some time to be thinking about if you're looking for a potential November vote this year, as you get this more information on the financial side of things.
Yeah, but a key piece of information I would need is like if we had a positive vote in November, could we start building in that next year? Or if we have to wait a whole another year anyway, then I'd feel differently. So that would just be a question for the architect.
Yeah, and he'll be there that evening as well. I'll make sure
Of course, he always comes.
Yeah.
And can I just ask, when we look at the cost for this project or any projects, at this stage, I'd really like it to be the cost of the project. I've seen some other things where we kind of subtract the fact that we're no longer paying other debt, and so, it's really $700,000 a year, but $300,000 is, debt that's retiring, so I'm only seeing $400,000. I would really like to see the whole thing, because I think we have some other projects that also need to be considered, like our safety tower, our tower, that I don't want to use up all of the PR of like, yeah, but you won't have to pay for the other thing, and so we can use this. I don't want to use that up, and then I can't sell it twice. So I really like just keep it really clean.
Yeah, that's what you were looking at, right, Shirley? Okay. Yeah. So we'll have that analysis for the board as you think about these different elements for that project. So stay tuned, July 15th coming up. Couple
Big
meetings. Town hall parking lot, that should get underway in July as well. We're just working to get some different charging stations that are the same as the park. There's just a little bit of lead time on getting those delivered. So it sounds like July we'll get that started. UPWP projects for this year, RPC awarded the traffic calming study for Old Creamery Road and the phase 2 of some video review of our stormwater pipe inspection. So it's good to get those projects funded. And then also for the July 1st meeting, I'm looking at an executive session. Wonder if the board's available for a 6:30 start that evening.
Yep. Okay with me?
People good with that?
I'm good with it.
Okay, all right.
Hey, Eric, you said, you mentioned the town hall parking lot and the Industrial Avenue Bridge and the picnic pavilion. How about our,
The
other
Allenbrook Bridge.
yeah,
Yeah, so our conservation planner is working on that with our engineer. I think he met with them the last week or so, and we're hoping to have an updated project estimate here in the short term, as I understand it. And I think there's potential to hopefully get the work done this year. We're going to see where the numbers land. What we had designated some ARPA money for that. We want to make sure that that's enough money based on the current environment. So
That would be great.
yeah, a lot of people are getting annoyed.
Comments.
yeah, yeah. So I will. I'll check with him on that too, and just see if we have a timeline figured out on those potential next steps. And okay, we'll plan for a 6:30 start then at your next meeting. And that's all I have for manager's report. Right?
Okay.
What brought about the traffic calming study for Old Creamery Road?
Yeah, that was originated, we got a resident request for that from some neighbors along that road. And in consulting with Public Works, we decided it was a worthwhile project to take a look at. And yeah, it was supported by the select board in January and then the regional planning commission. So it originated at a resident level, reaching out to my office in Public Works.
I've lived most of my life in the middle of a 1 mile straightaway.
Yeah.
Is the general, the finance report under manager's report or under other business?
Right. She sent it after I did this. Cheryl, do you want to brief the board on the finance report? Thanks for the reminder.
Super helpful write-up, by the way. Easy to understand, despite all the fact the words you used.
And so I don't know if I explained to you last time, but the reason that you're getting every month, even though this is a year-to-date, getting every month, because we do have a grant application that asks if the board gets budget versus actual report. So it's year-to-date, but you are seeing every month. And if you have any questions about those, you can let me know. So as usual, I'm only going to talk about the things that changed from last time. Retreatment is over budget, but I think there's like $15,000 left from the paving grant we got compared to the amount that we're over budget. And I'm not actually sure if, Bruce, any paving will be done before this year end. Do you know, Eric? We don't usually have it done till the summer.
No, it'll be in the summer.
So so right now that's looking about a 15,000 positive variance revenue over the increased expense. At this point, it's really hard to anticipate if we're going to need any of that 75,000 of community projects fund. You know, a question when we get to year end is if we need something, do we just use the general fund instead and leave those dollars and put them back into the pot? Which I think makes more sense because there's so many uses for those dollars. Because we definitely aren't going to need what we have from the general fund for our current projections. We're going to not need that 657,000. I can't remember exactly what the number was. 688,000. Local options tax, the first quarter, when we got the quarterly reporting versus budget, it was almost $100,000 unfavorable variance, so our budget was much higher. After the third quarter, we're now down to $45,000 variance. So hoping that when we get the final quarter reporting, we're pretty close to what our budget was, actual and budget. So fingers crossed on that one. But anyways, that used to be the big line item that always gave us revenues much greater than expenses every year, and that's why the general unrestricted general fund was building up. That will no longer be the case since we've increased the budget so much.
So this report has local option tax through January? I mean, I can't remember, it's like a lag, but.
Yeah, it's a lag. It's through February.
We typically
We
get
just
quarter
stopped the net-
4 in August, I believe. So then we'll know how we ended the year.
Right.
Right, but that's
It is.
sort of a big chunk, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Let's see. Property taxes, we expect to be right on budget. Of course, we've already booked it, so I know that we're right on budget. We have seen an increase, certainly over budget, and we're going to project to be over budget for the ambulance revenue for FY25. Budget 630. My best guess is about 700,000. We have entries to make at year end, but those will be positive because we are allowed to bring in, for accounting purposes, July and August payments on June receivables back into the prior year. So that's only a good thing. But some of it is based on the fees, and I went back and was looking at Aaron's call data for the third quarter select board reporting, and you can see how those call numbers are certainly increasing. Recreation revenue, as it always is above budget at this time of the year, and it will continue to be above budget. The rec zone has really taken off, I think, with the addition of Taylor. She's added a lot of new programs, and a lot of them are happening at the rec zone. The driver's ed program has gone over wonderfully. So they're making a lot more use of the rec zone, and which we expected as we had time to do more programs. General fund, and so I'm skipping a big chunk here because there's really not any differences in here. So I'm going to the general fund expenditure highlights. The salt budget is $10,000 overspent, but that is, all of our purchases are made for the year, and that's a hard one to predict. The last few years before that, we've been under budget. So Green Mountain transit fees are on budget because those are set, but the E&D transportation line, we have seen a lot more use of those services. So those are shopping, personal, non-major medical, vocational training trips. So in April, we essentially hit the town's portion of the budget. So I reached out to GMT, and they found 15,000 more federal dollars for us, which we have to match like $37.50. So that was no brainer. Give it to us. We can find $37.50 to keep our residents where they need to be. And that is the first time that that's happened in the 6 years that I've been here. And let's see, I'm jumping over now to water sewer to the third page. Water other revenue and sewer other revenue are at 55 and 48% of budget, but primarily due to the hook-on fees for the Snyder Annex development, with water hook-on fees of almost 20,000 and the sewer piece at 31,000. So they're driving that positive variance right now. Sewer allocation is at 224% of the $50,000 budget. The allocation sold, the 2005 allocation sold, which is being held, increased compared to the budget that we had booked. Part of that is for, I'll say 33,000 for Snyder, 10,000 for Adams Row property, and Allenbrook development for 8,000. So those are the big purchases, and let me say that again because I didn't say it so well. So allocation revenue, when we budget it, we only budget it for what we know we're holding and not what we think we might sell, because we don't always know what development is going to start or how many units will be developed. So those almost always come in favorable to budget. And
So your 2005 comment is we've been holding it since 2005, they finally bought it.
we bought some of it.
But we didn't budget for it.
Right,
Because
right.
we didn't know for sure. Got it.
Right,
I gotta tell you, that was a confusing sentence.
yes. Sewer treatment and other 50% of budget, but we only pay quarterly to the city of Essex, and we were 1 quarter behind with our payments. So really that's, so I'm gonna go back. That is billed based on budget. So they sent us a budget number, and then if we're over or under budget, that goes back to what we talk about, the stabilization fund. So if they charge us more than our actual usage, that goes into a fund in our name. If they charge us less and we use more, then that comes out of that pot. We don't really get that money back. But it's sitting there with the town of Essex does the allocation. Let's see. For stormwater, the capital expenditures are the street sweeper, which we all know about, and some more stormwater piping for Boyer Circle and Oak Hill, a total of about $61,000 for those 2 projects. And unless you have questions, those were the bigger changes.
So when I read that we may not need to use the 75,000 that's in the community fund, or is it ARPA money? Was it for your?
Community fund.
Community fund, okay.
Yeah.
I thought that meant like we were gonna be landing right on the edge and we may or may not need it, but you're saying we may not even need all of the fund balance that we applied either.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Oh, my guess is we won't use the community project fund, and if we use any of what we have from the fund balance, it'll be small.
Wow.
So last year, our net revenues over expenses were like $23,000 for FY24. I project we're going to be somewhere in that vicinity unless something really crazy happens at the end of the year. So, and really because if anything drives it right now, it's the ambulance.
Ambulance, yeah,
revenue.
that's pretty amazing numbers.
Yeah, yeah. And amazing numbers considering that they've had a lot of opening positions and people out for various reasons, and they're still doing that kind of volume.
Right.
Yeah, they're very busy.
Other questions from the board?
Thank you for bringing us good news.
Yeah, thank you.
Super thorough, thank you.
And this thing we got handed is just the annual, I forget, the Financial Management Questionnaire, Vermont Auditor's Office. So
Yeah, we're done with manager's reports, so
Yeah.
we can take this up under other business now. Our treasurer fills this out annually. Traditionally, the towns, we've passed a motion to accept, does that recall what we've done, Shirley? We've essentially,
Yeah, because it doesn't go anywhere. It's just we're required to fill it out and have you approve it, but it doesn't go anywhere. It's just, our auditors ask for it every year.
Do we approve it, or do we just acknowledge that we received it?
I think you just have to acknowledge you received it.
Acknowledge
Because the
receipt,
answers
yeah.
aren't going to change,
Yeah.
right?
so we'd be seeking a motion to acknowledge receipt of this.
I will move to
Document.
acknowledge receipt of the Financial Management Questionnaire.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There are no nays, the motion carries. It is accepted.
All right. And then I just have 2 catering permits for the board. They're both at Red Barn Gardens, and they both required temporary event permits that we recently approved at the staff level. One is on June 21st, and it is a birthday retirement party with 60 attendees. We're going to have a cash bar with beer, wine, and cider. We've reviewed at the staff level, provided them with comments. No major concerns. We've worked for this venue before. And the second is, it's a baby shower, wine and champagne being served on June 22nd. Estimated attendees 50. With these liquor licenses that are tied to temporary event permits, we have them get the temporary event permit first. to say, then we'll bring it to the select board. So staff recommends approval of both.
Any questions for Eric? Anybody want to move to approve the permits?
Move to approve the catering permits.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those, any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Approved.
Mike, you got to approve, you
I
got
know.
to say yes. That's,
Thinking
Eric, what was the venue?
Red Barn Gardens,
Where's that?
just down outside the village a little bit,
Right before French Hills.
right before, yeah,
On the
past the
left
farm
side
down
there.
there.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is there any other business?
Nope, that's it.
Right, then circling back for final thoughts on items from this meeting, are there any things we need to circle back on?
I don't know if it's really circling back, but it's a question that's been nagging at me. Our form that folks fill out for volunteer application asks if they have any felonies.
I've noticed that.
Is that legal and necessary?
I don't think it is.
It's a good question. You know, it's one of those forms the town's had for several years, so we'll take a look at that.
Yeah, actually, because there's, the legislature passed something years ago, I
Yeah.
think they called block the box or something like that, or the box check here if you can still ask people, but you can't have it on the application form. But it begs the question of whether these are job applications or not, and whether that's covered by.
Or if we want to, I mean, I don't really, if this is a position where they're working with children or vulnerable adults, then we would have a different check. They wouldn't just be like, this wouldn't be enough, so, I would
Yep.
prefer not to have it on there. But do you want to just think about that, Eric?
Yeah, we'll take a look into it and
Yeah.
just understand it. and-
Good job for an HR director.
Anything
Yeah,
else?
we'll take a look at it.
Is there a motion that we adjourn?
I move we
So
adjourn.
moved.
You can declare.
All right, I heard a second. We are adjourned.